You know, the smell of stale coffee and shattered dreams. That's the perfume of corporate ambition gone sour. And let me tell you, the air in Sterling Corp's analytics department on a Tuesday morning was thick enough to chew. I'm talking about that special kind of staleness you get when the espresso machine's been on the fritz for 3 days, and nobody, absolutely nobody, thought to call anyone who actually knew how to fix it. Nobody except the guy who was about to become yesterday's news. My name is Nathan. For the last 8 years, I've been the quiet engine humming behind the scenes at Sterling Corp. Not the flashy car out front, mind you, but the one in the garage, meticulously tuned, oil changed on time, every single bolt singing its correct tune. I'm a senior analyst. My job? To make sense of the noise. To turn a hurricane of data into a gentle breeze of actionable insight. I'm the guy who spots the market shift before it happens, who flags the inefficiency that's bleeding the company dry, who quietly optimizes the processes that make everyone else's job, well, easier. I'm the human equivalent of a highly specific, utterly indispensable piece of software that nobody truly understands until it crashes. And on this particular Tuesday, the crash was about to begin. It started with a summons. Not a dramatic law and order style summons, but the corporate equivalent. A passive-aggressive calendar invite from my direct superior, Ethan, titled Quick Sync, Performance Discussion. Ethan. The man was a walking, talking monument to self-importance. A man whose tie was always perfectly knotted and whose ego was always impossibly inflated. He'd glide through the office like a peacock on roller skates, leaving a trail of buzzwords and bewildered subordinates in his wake. His management style was less leading by example and more blame the lowest ranking goose when the herd gets lost. The invite landed in my inbox at 3:17 p.m. Just enough time for me to spend the rest of the day dreading it, dissecting every minor interaction I'd had with him in the past week, trying to pinpoint the exact infraction. Had I used the wrong shade of blue in my quarterly report graph? Did I accidentally exhale too loudly during his rambling explanation of synergistic paradigm shifts? The possibilities were endless, and frankly, terrifying. I walked into Ethan's office at precisely 9 a.m. the next day, my briefcase feeling heavier than a bag of lead weights. The office itself was a shrine to Ethan's perceived brilliance, a framed copy of a Forbes article about disruptive innovation that he was quoted in, naturally. A minimalist art piece that looked suspiciously like a spilled coffee stain, and a glass desk, so pristine you could see your future regrets reflecting in it. He was already there, of course, leaning back in his ergonomic chair, tapping a pen against a very thick folder. His smile was all teeth and no warmth, like a shark politely asking if you had any spare change. Nathan, please, have a seat. He gestured to the chair opposite him, the one that always felt a bit too low, designed, I suspected, to make everyone feel slightly inferior. So, the performance discussion. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, Ethan, I'm ready. He opened the folder, flipping through pages with an air of profound significance. You've been with Sterling Corp for 8 years, Nathan. A solid tenure. And your track record, well, it's been adequate. Adequate. The word landed like a tiny, precisely aimed dart. Adequate? After 8 years of late nights, of catching systemic errors that cost us thousands, of building the very analytical models that now populated his PowerPoint decks? Adequate. It was the corporate equivalent of telling a heart surgeon their stitch work was fine. Ethan, I began, carefully choosing my words, I believe my contributions have been more than adequate. My Q3 projections were accurate within 0.5%, and my optimization of the supply chain algorithm saved us nearly $200,000 last fiscal year alone. He waved a dismissive hand, his eyes glazing over. Yes, the numbers. We appreciate the diligence. But we're talking about the bigger picture here, Nathan. The leadership potential, the growth trajectory. Frankly, your trajectory has plateaued. Plateaued? My trajectory was a rocket ship, fueled by meticulous data analysis and a genuine desire to improve things. His trajectory was a hot air balloon, all hot air and no direction, being steered by someone who thought synergy was a magic spell. Ethan, I said, my voice hardening. I've noticed something. My male colleagues, particularly those with less experience than I have, are earning significantly more than I am. And I have a better track record. This is where Ethan's composure, that carefully constructed veneer of managerial competence, began to crack. His smile tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet condescending, whisper. Nathan, let me explain how the real world works. This is a competitive market. And frankly, it's just the way things are. The way things are? I repeated, incredulous. So, gender discrimination is just the way things are? He scoffed, leaning back again. Don't be dramatic. We pay competitively. And honestly, you should be happy with what you have. You have job security, a decent salary, good benefits. Not everyone is as fortunate. The condescension was a tidal wave, drowning out any remaining respect I had for him. Happy with what I have? I'm being paid less than my male peers for doing the same job, often better. That's not adequate, Ethan. That's unjust. He picked up the folder again, his fingers drumming a frantic rhythm on the cover. Look, Nathan, we're not going to debate this. The decisions have been made. And frankly, we're moving in a different direction. We're restructuring the department to focus on forward-thinking roles. My mind raced. Forward-thinking roles? Was this a veiled threat? A way to force me out? What does that mean for my position? I asked, my voice a low hum of dread. He avoided my gaze, staring at the coffee-stained art. Unfortunately, Nathan, your position has been deemed redundant in this new strategic alignment. Due to budgetary constraints, we've had to make some difficult decisions. Redundant, budgetary constraints, the classic corporate eulogy. It was so predictable, so cliché, it almost felt like a performance, a bad one. So, I said, the words tasting like ash, I'm being fired. Let's call it a separation of services, he corrected, his tone utterly devoid of sympathy. He slid a thin envelope across the glass desk. Here are your termination papers. We'll need your company laptop, your ID badge, and your building access card back by the end of the day. HR will be in touch regarding your final pay and any severance details. I looked at the envelope, then back at Ethan. He was already reaching for his phone, his focus shifting to some urgent buzzword he needed to tweet. He had already moved on. He had already forgotten the 8 years of loyalty, of diligent work, of quietly holding the damn company together when it threatened to fall apart. He saw me not as Nathan, the senior analyst, but as a line item to be crossed out. I stood up, my knees feeling a bit shaky. You know, Ethan, I said, my voice unnervingly calm, you talk a lot about forward thinking, but you're remarkably bad at thinking ahead. He glanced up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Is there anything else, Nathan? Just one thing, I said, my gaze unwavering. You've made a mistake, a big one. I didn't wait for his retort. I turned and walked out of his office. The silence of the hallway, a stark contrast to the cacophony in my head. The carpet seemed to absorb the sound of my footsteps, my existence fading like a poorly rendered JPEG. As I walked through the open plan office, I saw the usual sights. People hunched over keyboards, the faint hum of conversations, the lingering aroma of that perpetually broken coffee machine. No one looked up. No one noticed the man who had just been deemed redundant. I was already a ghost. But ghosts, as it turns out, have a very peculiar way of haunting. I went back to my desk, gathered my personal belongings, a worn-out coffee mug, a framed picture of my dog, a small, almost forgotten sticky note tucked into the corner of my monitor. It simply read, check section 12C, the old lease. I scribbled it down years ago during a particularly tedious lease renewal negotiation for our office space. A tiny detail I'd flagged then, a detail everyone else had long forgotten. It wasn't about the lease itself, but the principle. The idea that crucial details, the ones that held everything together, could be so easily overlooked by those in power. I packed my bag, feeling a strange sense of calm. The anger was there, a simmering coal, but it was tempered by something else, a cold, intellectual curiosity. They thought they were firing me for budgetary reasons. They thought they were making a smart, efficient business decision. They were wrong. They hadn't fired an analyst. They had unleashed a data scientist with a grievance and a highly sophisticated understanding of how companies really operate. As I walked towards the exit, Ethan's dismissal echoed in my ears. Be happy with what you have. Happy? Oh, I was about to be more than happy. I was about to be right. And the price of being right when you have the data is often a company's entire future. I didn't drive home directly. I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet diner, ordered a black coffee, the kind that tastes like resignation and possibility, and opened my laptop. The company laptop, still humming with Sterling Corp's proprietary network. A network I knew like the back of my hand. A network that, for the next few hours, was about to become my playground. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they hadn't accounted for the fact that I was still connected, and I had a lot of data to analyze. The redundant analyst was just getting started. The game was on. They thought they were firing a line item. They were wrong. They had just unleashed a meticulously calibrated data scientist with a very personal vendetta and a complete understanding of their systemic rot. They wanted me gone for budget reasons, fine. But the budgets they'd truly be worrying about were the ones that would soon be swallowed by lawsuits, fines, and the crushing weight of their own hypocrisy. You know, the most potent revenge isn't always loud. It's the quiet hum of an algorithm meticulously designed to dismantle an empire from the inside out. While Ethan was likely already drafting his LinkedIn post about strategic alignment and new leadership, I was already miles ahead. The corporate world operates on information, and I had an unparalleled understanding of Sterling Corp's data infrastructure. They thought they disconnected me. They were mistaken. I was still connected, not to their network directly, but to the very knowledge that underpinned it. The drive home wasn't about anger. It was about focus. It was about method. Sterling Corp's payroll system, like most of their systems, was a labyrinth of legacy code and undocumented quirks. Ethan, with his buzzwords and his self-importance, wouldn't know a data anomaly if it slapped him in the face with a severance package. But I did, and I knew exactly where to look. Back in my apartment, the blinds were drawn, the phone was on silent, and my personal laptop hummed to life. This wasn't about accessing their secure servers in real time. That would be too risky, too traceable. No, this was about leverage. This was about proof. I started with the emails. Not just my own, but every communication I'd ever been privy to concerning compensation, promotions, and performance reviews. I had a habit of saving everything, not out of paranoia, but out of a deep-seated respect for data integrity. My personal cloud storage was a meticulously organized archive of my career at Sterling Corp. Drafts of reports I'd optimized, flagged discrepancies in budgets, and, most importantly, the internal memos regarding salary bands and employee classifications that I'd squirreled away over the years. These weren't just documents. They were the blueprints of Sterling Corp's deceit. My objective wasn't to steal data. It was to reconstruct the narrative of their injustice. I cross-referenced my own performance metrics, the ones Ethan dismissed as adequate, with the salary data. And there it was, plain as day. A statistically significant discrepancy, not just between me and my male colleagues, but across the board. Women in similar roles with comparable or even superior experience were demonstrably earning less. The numbers didn't lie. They never do. But raw data can be dismissed, it can be argued away as market fluctuations or individual negotiation skills. I needed more, I needed context, I needed to show intent. This is where the discreet outreach began. It was a delicate dance. I couldn't use company channels, of course. I crafted anonymous messages using burner email addresses and encrypted messaging apps, reaching out to a select few individuals I knew through subtle conversations and overheard whispers, shared my suspicions, colleagues I'd worked with for years who had seen their own careers stall, their compensation stagnate, while others, often less qualified, sailed past them. My message was simple. Are you being paid fairly for your contributions? I'm gathering information. If you're interested in understanding your true market value and Sterling Corp's compensation practices, reply anonymously. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The quiet resentment that had festered within the company for so long was ready to boil over. Within days, I had a growing, albeit anonymous, network. We communicated through a secure, end-to-end encrypted platform, sharing anonymized salary data points. I fed them my meticulously gathered internal documents, the ones that proved Sterling Corp wasn't just undervaluing individuals, they were systematically undervaluing entire demographics. The pay gap wasn't an accident. It was a policy. Meanwhile, the first tremors of my absence began to ripple through Sterling Corp. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, but the subtle, unsettling feeling of something crucial being off. A critical supply chain optimization project I'd been managing hit a snag. A vendor, accustomed to my direct and efficient communication, started sending panicked emails to the generic departmental address, inquiries that went unanswered for hours, then days. A major client, whose quarterly performance report I personally prepared, flagged a glaring omission, a critical market trend I had identified and proactively addressed in my previous reports, but which was now conspicuously absent from their new analysis. The panic wasn't visible to me, not directly, but I heard it. Old colleagues, caught in the undertow, started sending me cautious texts. Hey Nathan, you hear anything about the Q4 projections? They seem off or strange? The procurement system is suddenly flagged with an error I've never seen. Any chance you recall how to reset it? Their messages were a barometer of Sterling Corp's rising anxiety. They were like water in a cracked dam, finding their way through the smallest fissures. Ethan, I imagined, was likely flustered, perhaps even enraged, that his precious, streamlined department was faltering. He would have delegated the problem, of course. To whom? To someone with my institutional knowledge, my analytical prowess, and my deep understanding of their flawed systems? Unlikely. He probably assigned it to a junior analyst who was still trying to figure out how to use the company's proprietary software, let alone navigate its decades of undocumented quirks. The seeds I had sown were beginning to sprout. The anonymous spreadsheet, now populated with dozens of verified pay discrepancies, was a ticking time bomb. Each entry represented not just a salary disparity, but a violation of trust, a testament to corporate greed. My contacts, armed with this irrefutable data, began to quietly engage with the company's legal department, not as a collective, not as a unified force, but as individuals, asking pointed questions about their compensation, citing the discrepancies they had now discovered. My own move was precise, calculated, and entirely legal. I didn't hack anything. I didn't leak sensitive proprietary information. Instead, I drafted a formal, yet polite, inquiry to Sterling Corp's general counsel. The subject line was innocuous: request for clarification regarding compensation, policy, and historical discrepancies. I attached a single anonymized summary report, a distillation of the most damning evidence from my spreadsheet. It highlighted the systemic pay gap, the disproportionate impact on female employees, and the statistical outliers that pointed to intentional discrimination rather than mere oversight. Crucially, I CC'd the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, on that email, not as an accusation, but as a formal notification of an ongoing inquiry into potential systemic discrimination. This wasn't an accusation, it was a summons. It was the corporate equivalent of ringing the doorbell and announcing, "We're here to audit." I didn't include any specific employee names, not yet. That will come later, with their consent and with the full weight of legal backing. My report was purely statistical, demonstrating a pattern so clear, so undeniable, that it couldn't be dismissed as anecdotal. It was the first domino. The response from the general counsel's office was swift, a curt acknowledgement of receipt and a promise to investigate thoroughly. But the tone had already shifted. The arrogance of Ethan's dismissal was replaced by the cold, professional caution of legal counsel who suddenly realized their client was facing a very real, very expensive problem. They knew a formal EEOC inquiry wasn't something to be brushed aside. The company wasn't in full panic mode yet, not quite, but they knew they were in trouble. They knew a significant problem had emerged, and they suspected, no, they knew, it had something to do with the recently redundant senior analyst. They had a sinking feeling, the kind you get when you realize you've just kicked a sleeping dragon. They knew the dragon was awake, but they had no idea how much fire it was capable of breathing. They were in a corner, and I was holding the only key to their escape. The silence that followed my initial inquiry was deafening. For a few days, it was as if Sterling Corp had evaporated. No more passive-aggressive calendar invites, no more unsolicited feedback sessions. The corporate world, in its infinite capacity for denial, tried to pretend I didn't exist. But the truth, like a stubborn stain on a white shirt, refused to be ignored. The EEOC's involvement, even at this preliminary stage, sent a shiver down Sterling Corp's spine. They couldn't just fire someone who had documented their own systematic discrimination and then politely alerted the relevant authorities. Then came the call. It was late on a Tuesday evening, the kind of time when you're usually winding down, not bracing for impact. The caller ID displayed Sterling Corp, Legal Department. I let it ring twice, the familiar cadence of corporate desperation already playing in my head. On the third ring, I picked up. "Mr. Nathan?" A voice, strained and tight, asked. It was Sarah Jenkins, the general counsel. Her usual calm, authoritative tone was frayed at the edges, replaced by a thinly veiled anxiety. We received your inquiry, and the subsequent notification from the EEOC. I didn't interrupt. I let her continue, her words tumbling out like loose change from a broken pocket. She spoke of misunderstandings, of data errors, of our commitment to a fair and equitable workplace. It was a symphony of corporate euphemisms, a desperate attempt to reframe the narrative before it truly solidified into a legal quagmire. "Miss Jenkins," I said, my voice deliberately calm, measured. There were no misunderstandings. There were no data errors. There was a deliberate, systemic practice of pay inequity perpetuated for years that I have meticulously documented. She took a sharp breath. "Mr. Nathan, we are prepared to address these concerns. We understand your feelings of betrayal. We would like to offer you a substantial settlement. Reinstatement with a significant salary increase, back pay, a formal apology from senior leadership." I cut her off, not with anger, but with a quiet finality that I knew would strike harder than any outburst. "Miss Jenkins, I'm not interested in a settlement. And I'm certainly not interested in reinstatement with a pat on the head and a slightly larger paycheck. Sterling Corp's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a violation of fundamental fairness that has harmed numerous individuals. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. I have provided the EEOC with statistical evidence of systemic gender-based pay discrimination. I have also provided them with a list of individuals who have consented to be named in a class action lawsuit, individuals who are prepared to testify to their experiences. The evidence, Ms. Jenkins, is irrefutable. This was the reveal. The secret weapon wasn't a piece of stolen code or fabricated scandal. It was the truth, painstakingly compiled, validated, and presented with absolute certainty. It was the sheer, unassailable power of data when wielded by someone who understood its true implications. A class action lawsuit? Her voice was barely a whisper now. Mr. Nathan, that could be catastrophic for Sterling Corp. It will be, I confirmed, unless we reach a different resolution. I had prepared two options, not for my benefit, but for theirs. A narrow escape hatch and the nuclear option. I understand you have concerns? I continued, my tone shifting slightly. So let me present Sterling Corp with two paths forward. Path A. You immediately initiate proceedings for the resignation of Ethan Miller, effective immediately due to gross mismanagement and documented discriminatory practices. Concurrently, you offer reinstatement to all individuals identified in my preliminary report, with back pay reflecting their true market value and a commitment to regular, transparent pay equity audits overseen by an independent third party. This would, of course, necessitate a significant restructuring of your HR and compensation departments. The EEOC will likely see this as a good faith effort towards restitution. I let that sink in. It was their best case scenario, a painful but manageable blow. Then came the second option. Path B, I said, my voice dropping to a more somber tone, is the path you seem determined to take. You refuse to acknowledge the evidence, you contest the lawsuit, and you attempt to discredit the plaintiffs. In this scenario, the class action suit proceeds. The EEOC will likely impose substantial fines, both punitive and compensatory. Key clients, seeing the headlines and fearing reputational damage, will likely sever ties. Sterling Corp will face a PR nightmare that will cripple its brand for years. Your stock value will plummet, and the cost of litigation alone will be astronomical. This is the nuclear option, the one that effectively obliterates the company as it currently stands. Silence, a heavy, suffocating silence, filled the line. I could almost hear the wheels turning in Sarah Jenkins's head, the frantic calculations of potential financial ruin. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. We need to discuss this with the board, immediately. I understand, I replied. You have 48 hours to make a decision. After that, I will have no further communications with Sterling Corp. All further contact will be through my legal counsel, who is already briefed and ready to proceed. The next 48 hours were a blur of speculation. Not for me, but for the executives at Sterling Corp. I knew they would fight. They were, after all, a company built on arrogance and a profound disregard for the people who made them successful. But I also knew they were pragmatists, at least when their bottom line was threatened. The call came precisely 7 hours and 58 minutes after mine. It was Sarah Jenkins again, her voice devoid of any pretense of authority, replaced by weary resignation. Mr. Nathan, she began, the board has convened. They have reviewed your proposal. They have chosen Path A. A wave of quiet satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was the deep, resonant calm of a problem meticulously solved. Excellent, I said. My legal counsel will be in touch to finalize the details. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Ethan Miller, the architect of my dismissal, was swiftly asked to resign for personal reasons, a corporate polite fiction that fooled no one. His public humiliation was quiet but absolute. He disappeared from the company's leadership page, his LinkedIn profile went dark, and his smug pronouncements about synergy vanished like smoke. The other underpaid employees, both male and female, received their back pay and their deserved raises. Sterling Corp launched a new pay equity initiative, complete with a highly publicized press conference featuring a carefully chosen spokesperson who wasn't Ethan, thankfully, and a promise of transparency. The independent oversight committee, staffed by respected labor economists and former judges, was a bitter pill for the old guard, but a necessary one. As for me, I didn't return to Sterling Corp. The thought of walking back into that environment, even with a vastly improved title and salary, held no appeal. My time there was over. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. The settlement I negotiated, separate from the restitution for the other employees, was substantial. It wasn't just compensation for my lost wages, it was compensation for 8 years of undervalued labor, for the stress, the emotional toll, and the sheer waste of my talent. I used a portion of it to invest in a small data analytics startup focused on ethical AI and fair labor practices. We weren't interested in disrupting industries. We were interested in building them equitably. My new office wasn't a sterile cubicle. It was a bright, open space filled with passionate people who believed, like me, that success shouldn't come at the expense of integrity. I watched from a distance as Sterling Corp navigated its new reality. They were wounded, humbled, and infinitely more cautious. The scent of stale coffee and shattered dreams had been replaced, if not entirely, then at least significantly, by the aroma of accountability. They had learned the hard way that firing a skilled analyst isn't just removing a person, it's potentially unleashing a force that can dismantle an entire enterprise. They thought they were cutting costs. They were actually investing in their own downfall. And I, the redundant analyst, the quiet engine, had simply ensured their budget for consequences was significantly higher than they ever anticipated.